Well, hello, this is Mr. Wells with 8th grade ELA. I hope you are having a good day today. This will be the first video for you as a remote learner for the literature part of this class. Now, I posted on Google Classroom the story that we are going to be reading. It is called Thank You, Ma'am by Langston Hughes. You should have a copy of it. And you can do this in a couple different ways. You could, if you have a printer, print out the story and then you could have a hard copy of it, or you could read the story on the PDF that I am sending you. PDF or link, I can't remember which one it is now, but you could send it, you could read it that way. If you can get it on the screen at the same time that I'm talking, because I'm going to be reading it to you. I'm going to be talking a little bit about it, but I would like you to follow along with it, because the other thing that I'm sending you is a document called a notice and note log, and it's going to show you what it looks like here. Your notice and note log looks like this. Okay. Says notice and note reading log on it. You'll put your name on here, and you'll put the name of the story right here. And so you'll use that too, and you can fill that out as well. Hopefully, you have the ability to convert maybe a PDF into a document that is a fillable document. If not, let me know and I will try to get you set up that way. But somehow you're going to be taking notes on this. Even if you want to create a Google Doc and submit it that way, when you do, you'll be able to do that. I know that what I'm saying so far, there's a lot to take in, a lot to think about. But remember that we're trying to really give you as best of an education as we can. Even though you're not here in the classroom with me, I want to make sure that you're learning all the same things that you've learned if you were here. Everything will be graded as well, so we're keeping you accountable that way, and make sure that you're turning things in on Google Classroom. All right, so go ahead and you'll take that out. Again, if you need to pause the video and look at it, you can pause it, unpause it. That's the advantage. One advantage of being a remote learner is you can pause me anytime you want, or you can replay me and try to catch what you didn't catch maybe beforehand. But we're going to start with this story. And what I want you to know is we're going to be working on what's called close reading. Now, close reading means reading something for really understanding it. There's a few different reasons why we read. Sometimes we read for entertainment. Sometimes we read to put ourselves to sleep at night, or because we have to for some reason. But if you're really reading something to understand it, that's what's called close reading. And we want to learn how to do that better. And so we are going to be looking for things called signposts. The word is signposts. And signposts are clues that tell us something about what the author is trying to say. Okay? And so we'll learn actually about 6 signposts before this unit is over. But your first signpost is called contrasts and contradictions. Contrasts and contradictions. And if you want, you can write that on your notice and note reading log. You could put even notice and note log for contrasts and contradictions. CONTRASTS and CONTRADICTIONS. Okay. What is a contrast and a contradiction? Well, we will get there. We will get there in just a moment. Give me a second here. So a contrast and a contradiction is when the character in a story says something or does something that you don't expect. And if you would, write that on your sheet somewhere in the margin, wherever you have room for it. Just write that down because you're going to want to know that. A contrast and a contradiction is when a character in the story says or does something that you don't expect. I don't know if any of you have ever read the Harry Potter books or seen the movies, but I want you to think about if you have a character like Hermione. Hermione was a good student. She was a very conscientious student, always doing her homework, always doing what she's supposed to, attempting to be in class on time. But if you're reading one of those books or watching the movie and all of a sudden you see that Hermione doesn't do her homework, or all of a sudden she doesn't show up where she's supposed to, that's something unexpected. And if it's something unexpected, then all of a sudden the wheels start turning in your brain and you start thinking, why would this be? Why would she not be there? Okay, so this is what we call a contrast and contradiction, when the character does or says something you don't expect. And whenever that happens, it should cause us to ask a question. And I want you to write down the answer to that question too. The question that you should ask is, why is the character acting this way? Why is the character acting this way? Why would Hermione not show up when she was supposed to? What is going on in the story that would make her do that? And when you come up with the answers to those questions, then that can really help you understand the story better. And sometimes it reveals the whole point of the story. All right. We're going to read this together. So if you follow along, this is called Thank You, Ma'am by Langston Hughes. And it is a story about a boy who tries to steal a purse from a woman. She was a large woman with a large purse that had everything in it but hammer and nails. It had a long strap, and she carried it slung across her shoulder. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and she was walking alone when a boy ran up behind her and tried to snatch her purse. The strap broke with a single tug the boy gave it from behind. But the boy's weight and the weight of the purse combined caused him to lose his balance. So instead of taking off full blast as he had hoped, the boy fell on his back on the sidewalk and his legs flew up. The large woman simply turned around and kicked him right square in his blue jean sitter. Then she reached down, picked the boy up by his front shirt, and shook him until his teeth rattled. After that, the woman said, "Pick up my pocketbook, boy, and give it here." She still held him, but she bent down enough to permit him to stoop and pick up her purse. Then she said, "Now ain't you ashamed of yourself?" Firmly gripping by his shirt front, the boy said, "Yes'm." The boy said, "What do you want to do it for?" The boy said, "I didn't aim to." She said, "You a lie." By that time, 2 or 3 people passed, stopped, turned to look, and some stood watching. "If I turn you loose, will you run?" asked the woman. "Yes'm," said the boy. "And I won't turn you loose," said the woman. She did not release him. "I'm very sorry, lady. I'm sorry," whispered the boy. "Uh-huh. And your face is dirty. I got a great mind to wash your face for you. Ain't you got nobody home to tell you to wash your face?" "No," said the boy. "Then it will get washed this evening," said the large woman, starting up the street, dragging the frightened boy behind her. Now let's stop here for a second and just ask ourselves this question. We see a contrast and contradiction. Think for a second what that contrast and contradiction is. If what you're thinking is that, it doesn't make sense for this woman to drag the boy home with her, then you're probably right, okay? But it makes us ask this question. Whenever we see a contrast and contradiction, which is when the character in a story acts or does something different than what is expected, we ask the question, why would the character act this way? Okay, so why would she act this way? Well, you think about it in many different things. This story takes place over 60 years ago. And so we look at it, and they're living in a different time, a different world than we are. But when we look at it, we think to ourselves, well, maybe she's kidnapping the boy. Maybe she has some evil intention. We have no idea really why she's doing this. So we don't know yet. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to keep reading, try to find out. So let's pick back up there. He looked as if he were 14 or 15, frail and willow wild in tennis shoes and blue jeans. The woman said, "You ought to be my son. I would teach you right from wrong. Least I can do right now is to wash your face. Are you hungry?" "No," said the being dragged boy. I just want you to turn me loose." "Was I bothering you when I turned that corner?" asked the woman. "No." "But you put yourself in contact with me," said the woman. "If you think that contact is not going to last a while, you got another thought coming. When I get through with you, sir, you are going to remember Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones." Sweat popped out on the boy's face, and he began to struggle. Mrs. Jones stopped, jerked him around in front of her, put a half Nelson about his neck, and continued to drag him up the street. When she got to her door, she dragged the boy inside, down a hall, and into a large kitchenette furnished room at the rear of the house. She switched on the light and left the door open. The boy could hear other roomers laughing and talking in that large house. Some of their doors were open, too, so she knew he and the woman were not alone. The woman still had him by the neck in the middle of her room, and she said, "What's your name?" "Roger," answered the boy. "Then, Roger, you go to that sink and wash your face," said the woman, whereupon she turned him loose at last. Roger looked at the door, looked at the woman, looked at the door, and went to the sink. I noticed a surprise here. I noticed something that I did not expect at all. What was it? It was this woman, lets him go. Well, what would you do? Well, if you're like me, I would have headed for the door. Okay, but what did he do? He didn't head for the door. What did he do? He headed for the sink. That's a contrast and contradiction. Okay, so what I want you to do is on your notice and note log here, we're doing contrasts and contradictions. I want you to take here and I want you to put the location. On the location, you're going to write, "Thank you, ma'am." That's the name of the story. "Thank you, ma'am." Second page, okay? And you're going to put signpost. The signpost that you noticed was contrast and contradiction. And if you want to abbreviate that CC, you're welcome to do that. CC in this class stands for contrast and contradiction. And remember, contrast and contradiction is when the character says or does something that you don't expect. Okay, so you can put that you noticed, contrast and contradiction. Okay, and you can write real briefly about it. He went to the sink and washed his face instead of running for the door. Went to the sink and washed his face instead of running for the door. Okay, so make sure you do that. Make sure you put the location, the name of the story, the page, the signpost you noticed, which in this case is contrast and contradiction, and what you noticed about it. You expected him to go to the door, but he went to the sink instead. Okay, I'm going to keep reading, and as I keep reading, I want you to make note of other contrasts and contradictions that you see. Okay, so when you do that, just write them down on here. And if you have to pause me, if you have to play me back while we're doing this, or reread the story later, however you want to do it. But let's make some right here. You should probably be able to get 2 or 3 before we're done here. Okay. "Let the water run until it gets warm," she said. "Here's a clean towel." "You going to take me to jail?" asked the boy, bending over the sink. "Not with that face, I'd not take you nowhere," said the woman. "Here I am trying to get home to cook me a bite to eat, and you snatched my pocketbook. Maybe you ain't been to your supper either, late as it be, have you?" "There's nobody home at my house," said the boy. "Then we'll eat," said the woman. "I believe you're hungry, or been hungry, to try to snatch my pocketbook." "I wanted a pair of blue suede shoes," said the boy. "Well, you didn't have to snatch my pocketbook to get some suede shoes," said Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones. "You could have asked me." "Ma'am?" The water dripping from his face, the boy looked at her. There was a long pause, a very long pause, After he had dried his face, not knowing what else to do, dried it again, the boy turned around, wondering what next. The door was open. He could make a dash for it down the hall. He could run, 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 run. The woman was sitting on the daybed. After a while, she said, I were young once, and I wanted things I could not get. There was another long pause. The boy's mouth opened. Then he frowned, but not knowing he frowned, and the woman said, Uh-huh. You thought I was going to say but, didn't you? You thought I was going to say but I didn't snatch people's pocketbooks. Well, I wasn't going to say that. Pause. Silence. I have done things too which I would not tell you, son, neither tell God if he didn't already know. So you sit down while I fix us something to eat. You might run that comb through your hair so you will look presentable. Okay, so by this time you should have found a couple, two or three contrasts and contradictions. You should have put them on your note and notice log, which would be the location, thank you, ma'am, and whatever page that was on, first, second, third page, and then the signpost you notice, which right now it's going to be contrast and contradiction. That's the only one we've learned. Okay, contrast and contradiction, and then the note. Okay, so you should have found a couple there. I'll look when I grade this. I'll see what ones you found, and hopefully be able to give you some feedback on that. But what I want you to think about while you're thinking about what you put on there is this idea that some of the things that you're going to write down are not maybe based necessarily on facts in the story. Okay, some of the things you're going to write down are inferences. Like, for example, maybe the contrast and contradiction was you didn't expect that this woman was also a thief. Okay, notice that was maybe one of them, that this woman says there's contrasts and contradictions, and the woman says, you thought I was going to say I didn't snatch people's pocketbooks, but I didn't say that. She doesn't come right out and say that she had stolen things when she was younger, but we infer that. It's called an inference. Now I want you to write down at the bottom of your page somewhere where you have room the definition of inference. An inference is an idea that you have that is based on what you read and already know. It is an idea that you have based on what you read and what you already know. Okay, and we make those all the time. All right. I want you to think, for example, about Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones in the story. What was, if I asked you, what does she look like? What would you say? Well, based on the story, you might say, well, she's a large woman. Okay, so she's heavy set. You would say, well, she's taller than Roger. But what else might you say about the way she looks? What if I told you that Mrs. Jones is a black woman? That she's African American? Well, you would say, Mr. Wells, that's not in the story. How would you know that? Well, I made an inference. An inference is an idea that you have that's based on what you read or already know. And it so happens that I already know about Langston Hughes and his stories and how he writes about the African American experience in the 1940s and 50s. Okay, he writes about the African American experience. Okay, so I know based on that this woman is African American. I also know based on something from the reading, and it's kind of hard to tell when you're not familiar with it, or when you're not thinking about it, or when I'm not reading it to you all that well. But Mrs. Jones speaks with a black dialect, a traditional black dialect in this story. And so by those two different things, even though it doesn't say that she's a black woman, we can infer that she is. Okay, that's just one example, all right? So when we're looking at this, we're looking at this in story. Sometimes we have the facts of the story. Sometimes we make an inference. An inference is an idea that you have based on what you read or already know. Okay, let's keep reading. In another corner of the room, behind a screen, was a gas plate and an ice box. Mrs. Jones got up and went behind the screen. The woman did not watch the boy to see if he was going to run now, nor did she watch her purse, which she left behind her on the daybed. But the boy took care to sit on the far side of the room where he thought she could easily see him out of the corner of her eye if she wanted to. He did not trust the woman not to trust him, and he did not want to be mistrusted now. You need somebody to go to the store? Asked the boy. Maybe to get some milk or something? Don't believe I do, said the woman, unless you just want sweet milk yourself. I was going to make cocoa out of this canned milk I got here. That will be fine, said the boy. She heated some lima beans and ham, and she had an ice box and made the cocoa and set the table. The woman did not ask the boy anything about where he lived or his folks or anything else that would embarrass him. Instead, as they ate, she told him about her job in a hotel beauty shop, stayed open late, what the work was like, and how all kinds of women came in and out, blondes, redheads, and Spanish. Then she cut him a half of her 10-cent cake. Eat some more, son, she said. When they were finished eating, she got up and said, Now here, take this $10 and buy yourself some blue suede shoes. And next time, do not make the mistake of latching onto my pocketbook nor nobody else's, because shoes come by devilish like that will burn your feet. I got to get my rest now, but I wish you would behave yourself, son, from here on in. She led him down the hall to the front door and opened it. Good night. Behave yourself, boy, she said, looking out into the street. The boy wanted to say something else other than, Thank you, ma'am, to Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones, but he couldn't do so as he turned at the barren stoop and looked back at the large woman in the door. He barely managed to say thank you before she shut the door, and he never saw her again. All right. I think you could probably come up with at least two more contrasts and contradictions. So I want you to go ahead from that last part of the story we read, that last page, and come up with two more. So I think that makes a total of at least 5 on your page here, okay, because we went over 1, and then I said in the middle section you could probably find 2, and then now you could find 2 more contrasts and contradictions. Now remember, contrast and contradiction is a signpost, a clue that we use in close reading to determine what the author is trying to tell us. Okay, what is the author trying to tell us? And when we look at it, one of the things that we're looking at is it unexpected? Contrast and contradiction, the definition of that is when a character says or does something that we don't expect. Contrast and contradiction, when a character says or does something that we don't expect. And sometimes we have to use an inference, okay? You have to infer to get that. An inference is an idea that you have that's based on what you read or already know. Okay? An inference is an idea that you have that's based on what you read and already know. So maybe it's the facts of the story, maybe it's an inference, but you might see a contrast and contradiction when the character behaves or acts in a way that is unexpected. And when that happens, you ask this one question: why? Why is the character acting this way? Why is the character acting this way? And hopefully, if I remember, we'll spend a few minutes in the next video before we move on to the next signpost. We'll spend a few minutes in the next video talking about why. What is this? What's with this woman in this story? And what is Langston Hughes trying to tell us by what she's doing? All right. Thank you. If you have any questions, please email me. You can email me at wellsdj@hoopston.k12.il.us. That's the school email. That's the best way to ask me a question. I suppose you could put something in the comments section on YouTube, but I don't know that I will watch that. But This is YouTube, so I have to end by saying make sure that you click subscribe and like the video, and I will see you next time.